Chapter 10 of Talents Incorporated by Murray Leinster. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Talents Incorporated. Chapter 10. The Meganese did not display a sporting spirit. There were 4 heavy cruisers and 11 lighter ships of the Horace's size and armament. According to current theories of space battle tactics, 2 of the light cruisers should have disposed of the Horace with ease and dispatch. It might have seemed sportsmanlike and certainly sufficient to give the Horace only 2 antagonists at a time, which would have been calculated to provide odds of 600 to 1 against it. 2 light cruisers would have fired 18 missiles apiece per salvo, which would have demanded 36 missiles from the Horace to meet and destroy them. She couldn't put 36 missiles into space at one firing. She would have disappeared in atomic flame at the first exchange of fire. But the Meganese were not so generous. They came up in full force, loaded for bear. They obviously intended not a fight, but an execution. Meganese tactics depended heavily on firepower of such superiority that any enemy was simply overwhelmed. Their maneuvering proved that they intended to follow standard operation procedure. Light ships reached space and delayed until all were aloft. They formed themselves into a precise half-globe and plunged at top solar system drive toward the Horace. This was strictly according to the book. If the Horace chose, of course, she could refuse battle by fleeing into overdrive, which would be expected to be the regulation many times faster than light variety. If she dared fight, the 15 ships drove on. Meganese ships never struck lightly. The 15 of them could launch 400 missiles per salvo. No single ship could counter such an attack. But even Meganese would not use such stupendous numbers of missiles against one ship unless that ship was famous, unless rumors and reports said that it was invincible and dangerous and the hope of oppressed peoples under Mekan. The Horace received very special attention. Then she vanished. At one instant she was in full career toward the fleet of enemies. The next instant she had wrapped an overdrive field about herself, and then no radar could detect her, nor could any missile penetrate her protection. When she vanished, the speck which indicated her position disappeared from the Mekanese radar screens. The 100th of a second in overdrive, as known to the Mekanese, should have put her hundreds of millions of miles away. But something new had been added to the Horace. The 100th of a second did not mean millions of miles journeying. It meant something under 3,000, and a much more precise interval of time could be measured and used by her micro-timer. Therefore, at one instant, the Horace was some 2,000 miles from the lip of the half-globe of enemy ships. Then she was not anywhere. Then, before the mind could grasp the fact of her vanishing, she was in the very center, the exact focus of the formation of Mekanese battlecraft. She was at the spot a Mekanese commander would most devoutly wish, because it was equidistant from all his ships, and all their missiles should arrive at the same instant when their overwhelming number could not conceivably be parried. But it was more than an ideal position from a Mekanese standpoint. It was also a point which was ideal for the Horace, because all her missiles would arrive at the encircling ships at the same instant. Each Mekanese would separately learn, without information from any other, that those projectiles could not be intercepted. No Mekanese would have the advantage of watching the tactic practiced on a companion ship to guide his own actions. The Horace appeared at that utterly vulnerable and wholly advantageous position. She showed on the Mekanese screens. They launched missiles. The Horace launched missiles. The Horace disappeared. She reappeared, beyond and behind the half-globe formation. Again she showed on the Mekanese screens. The Mekanese could not believe their instruments. A ship which fled in overdrive could not reappear like this. Having vanished and reappeared once, it could not duplicate the trick. Having duplicated it, this was more and worse. The Horace missiles were not being intercepted. Meekeny's missiles were swerving crazily to try to anticipate and destroy the curving, impossibly moving objects that went out from where the Horus had ceased to be. They failed. Clouds of new trajectoles appeared. A flare like a temporary sun. Another. Others. Bors turned from the viewport and glanced at the radar screens. There were 13 vaporous glowings where ships had been. There were 2 distinct blips remaining. It could be guessed that some targets had been fired on by more than one launching tube, leaving 2 ships unattacked by the Horus's missiles. Both of those ships, one a heavy cruiser, now desperately flung the contents of their magazines at the Horus. Bors heard his voice snapping coordinates. "Launch all missiles at those 2 targets," he commanded. "Fire! Overdrive coming! 5, 4, 3, 2. The intolerable discomfort of entry and immediate breakout from overdrive was ever present. But the Horus had shifted position 5,000 miles. Bors saw one of his just-launched missiles, now a continent away, as it went off. It accounted for one of the 2 Meekenese survivors. The radar blip which told of that ship's existence changed to the vaguely vaporous glow of incandescent gas. The other blip went out. No flare of a bomb. Nothing. It went out. So, the last Meekenese ship was gone in overdrive. It was safe. It could not possibly be overtaken or attacked. It had seen the Horus's missiles following an unpredictable course, which was duly recorded. It had seen the Horus go into overdrive and move only hundreds of miles instead of hundreds of millions. It had seen the Horus vanish from one place and appear at another in the same combat area, launch missiles, and vanish again before it could even be ranged. The last Meekenese ship certainly carried with it the Horus's tactics and actions recorded on tape. The technicians of Meeken would set to work instantly to duplicate them. Once they were considered impossible. Once they were recognized, they could be achieved. The combat efficiency of the Meekenese fleet would be increased as greatly as that of the fleet of Kandar had been, and the overwhelming superiority of numbers would again become decisive. The hopeless situation of the Kandarian fleet would become 100 times worse, and Meekenese counterintelligence would make a search for the origin of such improvements. Since Kandar was to have been attacked and occupied, it would be a place of special search. The only unsuspected source, of course, would be Talents Incorporated. For a full minute after the enemy ship's disappearance, Bors sat rigid, his hands clenched, facing the disaster the escape of the Meekenese constituted. Sweat appeared on his forehead. Then he pressed the engine room button and said evenly, "Prepare for standard overdrive. Top speed possible." He swung the ship. He lined it up with Meeken itself, which, of course, was the one place where it would be most fatal for a ship from Kandar to be discovered. Very shortly thereafter, the Horus was in overdrive. Traveling in such unthinkable haste, it is paradoxic that there is much time to spare. Bors had to occupy it. He prepared a careful and detailed account of exactly how the low-speed overdrive had worked, and its effectiveness as a combat tactic. He distributed instructions and Logan's tables on the subject before leaving Glamis. He would be, of course, most bitterly blamed for having taken on a whole squadron of enemy ships, with the result that one had gotten away. It could be the most decisive of catastrophes. But he made his report with precision. For 7 successive ship days there was no event whatever on the Horus as he drove toward Meeken. Undoubtedly, the one survivor of the enemy squadron was fleeing for Meeken too, to report to the highest possible authority what it had seen and experienced. It would not be much, if at all, slower than the Horus. It might be faster, and might reach the solar system of Meeken before the Horus broke out there. It had every advantage but one. It had solar system drive, for use within a planetary group, and it had overdrive for use between the stars. But the Horus had an intermediate drive as well, which was faster than the enemy's slow speed and slower than the fast. Bors depended on it for the continued existence of Kandar and the fleet. As the desperately tedious ship days went by, he began to have ideas, at which he consciously scoffed, concerning Tralee. But if anything as absurd as those ideas came to be, there were a score of other planets which would have to be considered too. He sketched out in his own mind a course of action that would be possible to follow after breakout off Meekin. It did not follow the rules for sound planning, which always assume that if things can go wrong, they will. Bors could only plan for what might be done if things went right. But he could not hope. Not really. Still, he considered every possibility, however far-fetched. He came to first breakout a light week short of Meekin. The yellow sun flamed dead ahead. He determined his distance from it with very great care. The Horus went back into overdrive and out again, and it was well within the system, though carefully not on the plane of its ecliptic. Then the Horus waited. She was 20 millions of miles from the planet Meekin. Bors ordered that for intervals of up to 5 minutes, no electronic apparatus on the ship should be in operation. In those periods of electronic silence, his radar swept all of space except Meekin. He had no desire to have Meekin pick up radar pulses and wonder what they came from. The rest of the system, though, he mapped. He found 2 meteor streams and a clump of 3 planetoids in a nearly circular orbit, and he spotted a ship just lifted from Meekin by its landing grid. It went out to 5 planetary diameters and flicked out of existence so far as radar was concerned. It had gone into overdrive and away. Another ship came around Meekin, in orbit. It reached the spot from which the first ship had vanished. It began to descend. The landing grid had locked onto it with projected force fields and was drawing it down to ground. Bors growled to himself. It was not likely that this ship was the one he'd pursued, sight unseen, since the end of the fight off Meriden. But it was a possibility. If it were true, then everything that mattered to Bors was lost forever. Then a blip appeared. It was at the most extreme limit of the radar's range. A ship had come out of overdrive near the 4th planetary orbit of this solar system. Bors and the yeoman computer operator figured its distance to 6 places of decimals. Bors set the microsecond timer. The Horus went into low-speed overdrive and out again. Then the electron telescope revealed a stubby, rotund cargo ship about to land on Meekin. Bors swore. It would be days before this tub reached Meekin on solar system drive. But it must not report that an armed vessel had inspected it in remoteness. "We haul alongside," said Bors angrily. "Boarding parties, ready in the space boats." Another wrenching flicker into overdrive and through breakout without pause. The cargo boat was within 10 miles. "Calling cargo boat," rasped Bors, in what would be the arrogant tones of a Meekinese naval officer hailing a mere civilian ship. "Identify yourself." A voice answered apologetically, "Cargo ship, Empress, sir, bound from Laurel to Meekin with frozen foods." "Cut your drive," snapped Bors. "Stand by for inspection. Muster your crews. There's a criminal trying to get ashore on Meekin. We'll check your hands. Acknowledge." "Yes, sir," said the apologetic voice. "Obeying, sir." Bors fretted. The space boats left the Horus's side. One clamped onto the airlock of the rounded, bulging trap ship. The second lifeboat hovered nearby. The first boat broke contact, and the second hooked on. The second boat broke contact. Both came back to the Horus. The screen before Bors lighted up. One of his own crewmen nodded out of it. "All clear, sir," said his voice briskly. "They behave like lambs, sir. No arms. We've locked them in a cargo hold." "You know what to do now," said Bors. "Yes, sir. Off." 10 miles away, the cargo boat swung itself about. Suddenly it was gone. It was on the way to Glamis and the fleet. Another hour of watching. Another blip. It was another cargo carrier like the first. As the other had done, it meekly permitted itself to be boarded by what it believed were mere naval ratings of the Meekanese space fleet, searching for a criminal who might be on board. Like the first ship, it was soon undeceived. Again like the first, it vanished from emptiness, and it would be heading for the fleet in its monotonous circling of Glamis. The third blip, though, was a light cruiser. The Horus appeared from nowhere close beside it, and its communicator began to scream in gibberish. It would be an official report, scrambled and taped, to be transmitted to ground on the first instant there was hope of its reception. "Fire 1," said Bors. "The skipper there is on his toes." He watched bleakly as the Horus's missile arched in its impossible trajectory, as the light cruiser flung everything that could be gotten out to try to stop it, while its transmitter shrieked gibberish to the stars. There was a blinding flash of light, then nothing. "He got out maybe 15 seconds of transmission," said Bors somberly, "which may or may not be picked up from this distance, and may or may not tell anything. He got a tape ready while he was in overdrive, with plenty of time for the job. My guess is that he'd take at least 15 seconds to identify his ship, give her code number, her skipper, and such things. I hope so." But for minutes he was irresolute. He'd send out his own minutely detailed report back to Glamis on the second captured ship. He did not need to return to report in person. He hadn't yet sent back provisions enough for the intended voyage of the fleet. The solar system of Meekan was an especially well-stocked hunting ground for such marauders as Bors and his crew declared themselves to be, so long as word did not get to ground on Meekan. But it did not get down. From time to time, at intervals of a few hours, specks appeared in emptiness. Meekan monopolized the off-planet trade of its satellite world. There would be many times the space traffic here that would be found off any other planet in the Meekanese Empire. One ship got to ground unchallenged. By pure accident, it came out of overdrive within 500,000 miles of Meekan. To have attacked it would have been noted. But he got 2 more cargo ships. Then he found the Horus alongside a passenger ship, but it couldn't be allowed to ground, to report that it had been stopped by an armed ship. A prize crew took it off to Glamis. Bors made a formal announcement to his crew. "I think," he told them over the all-speaker circuit, "that we got the ship which could have reported our action off Meriden. I'm sure we've sent 4 shiploads of food back to the fleet, besides the passenger ship we'd rather have missed. But there's still something to be done. To confuse Meekan and keep it busy, therefore, off Kandar's neck, we have to start trouble elsewhere. From now on, we are pirates, pure and simple." And he headed the Horus for the planet Cassis, which was another victim of the Meekanese. It was a rocky, mountainous world with many mines. Meekan depended on it for metal in vast quantities. The Horus hovered over it and sent down a sardonic challenge. One missile came up in defiance. But it was badly aimed, and Bors ignored it. Then voices called to him, sharp with excitement. He heard shots and shouting, and a voice said feverishly that rebels on Cassis, who had been fighting in the streets, had rushed a transmitter to welcome the enemies of Meekan. Bors had 1 light cruiser and merely a minimum crew for it. He couldn't be of much help to insurrectionists. Then he heard artillery fire over the communicator, and voices gasped that the Meekanese garrison was charging out of its highly fortified encampment. Bors sent down a missile to break the back of the counterattack. Then the communicator gave off the sound of gunfire and men in battle, and presently yells of triumph. He took the Horus away. Its arrival and involvement in the revolt was pure accident. It was no part of any thought-out plan. But he was wryly relieved when he had convinced himself that Meekan needed the products of this world too much to exterminate its population with fusion bombs. More days of travel in overdrive tedium. Bors was astounded and appalled. Interference here would only make matters worse. The Horus went on. There was a cargo ship aground on Dover, and the Horus threatened bombs, and a space-boat went down and brought it up. That ship also went away to Glamis, where the fleet was accumulating an inconvenient number of prisoners. The fact that the capture of this ship only added to that number made Bors realize that King Humphrey would be especially disturbed about the passengers on the liner sent back from Meakin. Unless they were murdered, sooner or later they would reveal the facts about the fleet, and King Humphrey was a highly conscientious man. There was dissension even on Dover. The landing party was cheered from the edge of the spaceport. Bors could not understand. He tried to guess what was going on in the Meakinese Empire. He could not know whether or not disaster had yet struck Kandar. He could only hope that there were ships lurking near it, ready to use the recent technical combat improvements against any single Meakinese ship that might appear, so no report would be carried back. But it seemed to him that utter and complete catastrophe was inevitable. He reflected unhappily about Tralee, and wondered what the Pretender, his uncle, really thought about his loosing of chemical explosive missiles against puppet government buildings there. He found himself worrying again about the truck drivers who'd warned his men of booby traps in the supplies they delivered. He hoped they hadn't been caught. The Horus arrived at Deccan, and called down the savage message of challenge. There came a tumultuous, roaring reply. "Captain Bors!" cried a voice from the ground exultantly. "Land and welcome! We didn't hope you'd come here, but you're 1,000 times welcome! We've smashed the garrison here, Captain! We rose days ago, and we hold the planet! We'll join you! Come to ground, sir! We can supply you!" Bors went tense all over. He'd been called by name. If he was known by name on this world, 20 light-years from Meakin and 35 from Kandar, then everything was lost. "Can you send up a spaceboat?" he asked in a voice he did not recognize. "I'd like to have your news." It must be a trap. It was possible that there'd been revolt on Deccan. He'd found proof of rebellion elsewhere. There'd been claims of revolt on Cassis, but he hadn't been suspicious then. He'd sent down a missile to help the self-proclaimed rebels there. Now he wondered desperately if he'd been tricked there, as it was all too likely he would be here. There'd been reported fighting on Avino. There was cheering for his men on Dover, and he might have landed there. But there were too many coincidences, far too many. He waited 50,000 miles high, with the ship at combat alert. He felt cold all over. Somehow news had preceded him. It was garbled truth, but there was enough to make his spine feel like ice. He spoke over the all-speaker hookup, in a voice he could not keep steady by any effort of will. "All hands attention," he said heavily. "I just called ground. We have had a reply calling me by name. You will see the implication. It looks like, somehow, the Meakinese have managed to send word ahead of us. They found out that no one can stand against us. They know we have new and deadly weapons. Probably there have been orders given to lure us to ground by the pretense of a successful revolt. It would be hoped that we can be fooled to the point where we will land and our ship can be captured, undestroyed. That's the way it looks." He swallowed with difficulty. "If that's so," he said after an instant, "you can guess what's been done about Kandar. The Grand Fleet was assembled on Meakin. It could have gone to Kandar." He swallowed again. Then he said savagely, "We'll make sure first. If the worst has happened, we'll take our fleet and head for Meakin and pour down every ounce of atomic explosive we've got. We may not be able to turn its air to poison, but if there are survivors, they won't celebrate what they did to Kandar." He clicked off. His fists clenched. He paced back and forth in the control room. He almost did not wait to make sure. Almost. But he had never seen a Meekanese fighting man face to face. He'd gone into exile with his uncle, when that unhappily reasonable man let Tralee surrender rather than be bombed to depopulation. He'd served in the Kandarian Navy without ever managing to be in any port when a Meekanese ship was in. He'd fought in the battle off Kandar. He'd destroyed a Meekanese cruiser off Tralee, another in the Meekanese system itself, and a squadron off Meriden. But he had never seen a Meekanese fighting man face to face. Filled with such hatred as he felt, he meant to do so now. A spaceboat came up from the ground. The Horus trained weapons on it. Boers painstakingly arranged for its occupants to board the Horus in spacesuits, which could not conceal bombs. There were 6 men in the spaceboat. They came into the Horus's control room, and he saw that they were young, almost boys. When they learned that he was Captain Bors, they looked at him with shining, admiring, worshipping eyes. It could not be a trick. It could not be a trap. He was incredulous. The message from the ground was true. End of Chapter 10.